Thanks for joining us for the second installment of a program called Read Local. My name is Cecile Werman. I've been a journalist for decades, and these days I'm the executive director of the North Dakota Newspaper Association, NDNA. Read Local isn't just the program you're going to be watching now, it's a larger initiative of our association aimed at getting people to pay attention to local news. As just one prong of this initiative, this program will better acquaint you with who is bringing you the news in North Dakota. Recent research around the country has shown few people know a journalist. For instance, 51% of rural people in the Americas Newspaper's 2026 Roadmap study said local journalists could do a better job if they make themselves more accessible to readers. So this program is one way of doing that, and we're also going to talk about why it maybe is that journalists haven't been accessible in the past. Today's guest is Grant Coursey, state government reporter for the Bismarck Tribune. He's fresh off the heels of being named NDNA's Rookie Reporter of the Year, and he's recently had some coverage of some pretty high-profile news. Welcome, Grant.
Hi, Cecile. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could join us. Just to first, give people a sense for where you're coming from or where you came from. Tell me about your journey, where you grew up, where you went to school, things like that.
Sure. I mean, I grew up in Northern California, little town like 2.5 hours north of San Francisco up in the Redwoods. I ended up going to school at Colorado State University. Didn't study journalism. I studied history and political science and kind of fell into journalism my last semester. I started writing for the school paper, found out I just loved it, and wanted to continue with it. So out of college, I had made some connections at my time at the paper, and they led me to Ukraine following shipments of humanitarian aid, or non-lethal humanitarian aid, I should say. And so I got to go over there, and I was there for about 2 months. Yeah. And
we're breaking news here. I didn't know anything about this.
Yeah, so I was there for 2 months covering, these humanitarian shipments, and I followed a shipment from a place in Colorado, all the way out kind of on each leg of its journey until it made it to frontline soldiers in Kharkiv. And I published those with a Polish news agency.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for you. What an amazing start to your career.
I know. It was incredible, and it got me way more hooked than I ever thought I was going to be. And then I came back. I was like, okay, time to go into communications and get a real job. Journalism's hard. And I realized I could not do communications. It just wasn't as fulfilling.
Let's explain the difference. Give me a layman's explanation of what is the difference between communications and being a journalist.
Yeah, well, communications, you're working for a specific organization and you have a specific goal. You are presenting that organization's goals and narratives and connecting with that organization's audience. It's very kind of point to point. You have the group that you are working for and you have the group that you are kind of giving this information, this message to. Journalism provides a lot more freedom in my experience. You're learning new things every day. You're covering new things every day. You still have an audience, but instead of having a very specific message you're giving to them, you're trying to explain a myriad of different topics for them and keep them informed, which just is more engaging for me.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I mean, with all the concern there is these days about bias or people pushing an agenda,
sure.
If your job is to communicate for a company or for an agency, I don't want to say your job is to make them look good, but your job is to advance their message, not necessarily the message that might most benefit the public or there's a little bit of a transparency issue there potentially.
I'm pulling a paycheck to sell someone else's narrative versus I'm pulling a paycheck to sell the truth's narrative is the goal, right? That at the end of the day is my job, is to find out what the truth is and give it to the people.
Right. And this kind of leads into something we talked about before we started taping, and that is the fact that, as a journalist, you don't want to be the story.
No, I feel like there's a stigma around that, in fact, where if a journalist is well known, especially in print, where your face isn't, all over the TV screens, then, there's this inherent belief that maybe you're seeking out that glory or you want that attention, when really the job should be its own reward a lot of the time, that really what you're providing, you should almost be removed from the story as much as possible. And so I think that there has been this idea that if you're known, that's not necessarily a great thing.
Yeah, unless you're trying to be an influencer.
Sure.
And an influencer is not necessarily. I mean, just by its definition, if you're an influencer,
Yeah.
you're not a journalist because you're not objective.
And that is the modern age of news. A lot of people get their news from people that maybe call themselves journalists, but don't fit a traditionally journalistic role, that are influencers, that have an audience and really sell their image and themselves as much as they do the news. And sure, there are plenty of folks that do that are good journalists, that can provide good news, but there are plenty of folks that can't either. And trying to tell between one and the other, I think, can be pretty difficult for folks.
Right. And so in this environment that we're in today, with everybody having a different idea about what media is,
Sure.
what news is, how we get it, what's different about it than you might have imagined when you first started out?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think when I started out, I was unaware. There's been stories for like a decade about how, print is dying, journalism is dying. And that's not the case, at least in my experience. But you do have reporters working twice as hard to produce just as much content as they did a decade ago. I think the support systems make it so that the journalists that are doing this have to be very driven, because you don't have the support you used to. You have to really care about this if you want to stick with it. And I've seen plenty of folks that I went to school with or wrote with at my college paper who burned out because it was just too much. And I think I didn't quite know getting into this the level of work it requires to produce the same kind of content with fewer resources than journalists have had in the past. I got lucky. I love this. I can't imagine doing anything else. So I'm going to do it regardless of how much work is involved. And I think there are plenty of other journalists that feel that way. But it was eye-opening, certainly, to see what resources are available to journalists these days.
Right. And that all gets back to audience and where people are getting their news. And one of the things we do at NDNA is try to, that's what Read Local is all about, is trying to make people realize that they, with all the things they're bombarded with every day, if they don't pay attention to their local news organization, it may not be there in the future. I just, picking up on something you said, it cracks me up when people might think that, a journalist has an agenda that they're trying to push. It's like, why would you take this job? That just to push an agenda. I mean,
Sure.
Do you find that your fellow workers are quite altruistic?
I do, certainly, and I think many journalists are. Of course, I read Facebook comments on our page, and I see plenty of folks thinking that I just wake up in the morning and come up with whatever story I'm going to write that day over my coffee and bagel. But, that's not how it actually works, though that can be the perception, I think, to some people. Most folks really have a desire to find stories, a curiosity to find the stories that their audience is going to care about, and that's what keeps them doing this job.
Mm-hmm. And part of that is being part of the community yourself.
Yeah.
So you look at what's going on in state government and try to say, okay, how does that impact me? How does that impact my neighbor?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to live here too, right? And so trying to understand what my readers care about, I think it's crucial. We see that as a big separation between local media and national media. I think that in national media, the scope and the scale of what you're covering is so far removed from the everyday reader, it can get hard to determine, okay, well, how do I make this a niche narrative that my reader is really going to understand? Because your reader is widespread. It's people across many communities, geographically, culturally, whatever it might be. But for local news, it's like I can actually get a pretty good handle on who is here and who I'm writing for, because I'm getting coffee at the same coffee shops they are. I'm getting dinners at the same Mexican restaurants that they are, or getting a drink at the same bars they are. So I understand a little bit more, and I think it's crucial that local journalists live where they work for that reason, because you understand what is everyone else experiencing.
Right. And you touched on this a little bit, but let's talk about the product of how local news differs from national news. I mean, you alluded to it, it's a different scope, but it's also more specific, I think. You know, they can talk Trump all day long. You know, sometimes it seems like, oh my gosh, you know, are we going to talk about anything that's going on in the country nationally?
Sure.
Besides what's happening, you know, in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
But you've got every state agency, legislators. Tell me a little bit about some of the variety of subjects that you cover.
Yeah,
every week.
it can be a lot, and I certainly think that is also part of local news. Is that even though I have a specific beat, I'm the politics and state government reporter for the Bismarck Tribune. That's a pretty wide-ranging beat. Whereas if you get up national, I do think that folks hyperfixate on very specific topics, and that's what they write. And when I end up having to cover, especially during, say, a legislative session, property tax, and then healthcare policy, and then we're going to talk about maybe a culture war bill that's cropped up, which we had a lot of last session. You know, I'm having to jump around and learn new topics every day. And the nice thing about that is that it actually informs you in ways you don't expect it to on other topics. It creates a more holistic view of how these topics kind of knit together to form the way that the public engages with their government. It's like, okay, well, our roads are funded by the same source that, say, oh gosh, what would it be? Our bridges are, right? Well, there's a balance during legislative session to determine where do we put that money. And so if you just fixate on one or the other, and this is a very specific example, but if you just were to focus on covering one or the other, you'd miss the context. And so I think that getting to cover a wide-ranging beat as far as state government goes for me allows me to cover all of it better.
Right.
Whereas national doesn't necessarily do that.
Right. You know, you said so many things in that last answer that I'm like, which one am I going to pick up on first? But just your title, politics and state government.
Sure.
Today, having a job title that includes the word politics. I mean, you've got to. How do you make everybody happy? I mean, that's not your job.
You don't. Yeah, absolutely. It's very similar. I take a very similar approach to it as. You know, the joke among lawmakers when I'm speaking with them during session is if everyone comes out of the room unhappy, then we probably have a bill that can pass, and it's good. And similarly, you know, if everyone generally has a bit of a gripe about my story when it comes to politics these days, that actually can be kind of a good sign because folks feel very strongly about politics and they're very polarized. And so if you've got one side or the other very happy with your story, you might have skewed it accidentally. And so luckily I haven't had that happen with any of my stories, but it really is generally if you're on the middle of the road, no one's really very happy with political coverage these days. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough line to walk. But even though at times sources may not be happy with how they perceive you reported something.
Sure.
Over time, how does that relationship develop? Have you been at it long enough that you've seen something come around and have gained maybe a little bit of cred or respect that you're dealing, you know, fair?
Certainly, I think that is crucial, especially in local journalism, to create connections and rapport with sources. They don't have to like you necessarily or appreciate, you know, everything you write or have it align with them. They just have to know that you are going to give them a fair shake and that you are out there truly trying to present their perspective as accurately as possible and present a topic as accurately as possible. If you can do that consistently, it does win folks over. Mm-hmm. I've had a number of lawmakers that traditionally have not been big fans of the media and have not talked to the media much in previous sessions. And I've been lucky enough to connect with them directly and say, hey, I understand you might have had bad experiences. Why don't you give me a chance? I'll show you that I'm going to give you a fair shake, try to give everyone a fair shake, and been able to develop those relationships over time. Mm-hmm. So I really have found that generally people are very understanding and they want to connect with you at a human level. If they understand, hey, here's someone I can know, here's someone that I can trust over engaging with them multiple times over the course. I've been here a year and a half, a little more now. And they are going to give me the best shake possible, and they're accessible, because that's the other thing that I think is really important, is that a lot of these sources and my connections with them I maintain a lot. I'm very accessible as much as I can be. I try to engage with these folks as frequently as possible. So I don't just parachute in, cover a topic, and take off, right? They have that ability to connect multiple times and build that rapport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess one of the biggest accolades a reporter might have is if they start a relationship out with a source and maybe it doesn't quite go the way the source liked it,
Sure.
and then later they come to you and say, "Hey, this is the perfect story for you. I want you to look into this."
Yeah.
Boy, is that a vote of confidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. if folks are coming back to you and saying, "Hey, I know I wasn't overly happy with your story last time, but I still trust you enough to come to you with what I think is a big story this time."
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. That lets you know that you are still trusted as someone to come to with information. And a lot of that is because folks want it to get out to the public. I think that there is a perception at points that state government, state agencies can be this kind of black box. But I've found that generally a lot of them do want to communicate with the public as much as possible. And I've been lucky enough that they've done that through communicating with the media. The North Dakota Monitor is another one that covers a lot of state government topics, and similarly, I'm very close with them. They've got good relationships with our state government. So making sure that our media, is seen as that way to the people is really important, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, to maintain that. And this program is all about encouraging people to continue to participate,
Right.
by reading, the things that you're gathering and showing that, newspapers still have an audience. And
Yeah.
boy, what do we do without them? Who's
Yeah.
gonna cover things? I'm struck by what you said about people wanting to meet you on a human level. I think that's part of what we're trying to do here today, is to, I guess, break the mystique that you're some mysterious person that crawls around the Capitol, looking
Well, a magnifying glass, and yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're just an average guy. I mean, no,
I am. Some would say below average. Depends who you ask. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that can definitely be lost in translation at points. I am absolutely an average guy. I love skiing and climbing. I love hiking. I love the outdoors. I'm an avid fiction reader. I love getting out in downtown Bismarck for a beer at, say, JL Beers, which is, right near my place downtown. So I do, everything that every normal person does. And so it can be a little bit demoralizing when you read some of these things on Facebook, or you engage with someone in the public who has that perception that you are selling a narrative or a member of this kind of media elite. It's like, I'm pulling a paycheck. This is my job. And not a great one either.
Right. I mean, that's universal. Journalism does not pay as well as communications.
No, it does not.
Does. And people got to feed their families, and so not shedding any shade on somebody who works in communications. And
Sure.
Gosh, if you've had journalism background, you can do a really good job at that.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, you have to, as we said before, you have to really want to do this.
Yeah, you do.
And it's just that your job, your workday ends up getting displayed
Yes.
for everyone to see and comment on
Routinely.
So you kind of have to have sort of a tough exterior a little bit to just take it with a grain of salt and not let it influence you.
I think you have to be confident that you are doing this for the right reasons and you're doing the absolute best job you possibly can. And I think I come away from most days feeling that way. Not every day. You're always going to have a day sometimes where you're like, gosh, today really beat me up, or whatever it might be. But I think the vast majority of days I come away from my job, I feel very good about the story I was able to get and the way I was able to craft it and portray as many sides as possible, give my readers as clear a picture of a topic as possible, and get that out there. And then just understanding that no one's gonna, not everyone is gonna be happy all of the time, and there's nothing I can do about that. I have no control over that. I can just do, the best work I can, and hope for the best.
Right. And something else you said earlier too, how do you explain what news is? Well, it's the truth. It's trying to get at the truth. I mean, if you're satisfied that, you told the truth as you found it.
Yeah.
You called the ball or the strike the way you saw it. What else can you do?
Yeah, and often it's not even the way that I saw it, though I do try to, I feel like there is an empirical truth that we can try to get to as journalists, that there is a way that something has happened. But a lot of times it's portraying the truth of whoever I am engaging with, right? And so often there are multiple perspectives on any number of issues, especially in politics. And so part of it is ensuring that I have found the right person that really knows a topic, that can express that, opinion on the truth, on both sides of an issue as best as possible, or on 6 sides of an issue, because often when we're dealing with politics, we do distill it down to kind of 2 sides, but it's rare. It actually is just 2 sides. There's a lot of stakeholders. A lot of people are affected by politics.
Sure. Yeah, it impacts everybody.
Yeah.
One of the misconceptions maybe people have is that, big stories can't happen in smaller places. But boy, lately around Bismarck and North Dakota, we've had some pretty big stories. Tell me about your involvement with the recent presidential visit and the opening of the TR library in Medora.
Gosh, yeah, that was an experience, certainly. I was lucky enough last year on the 4th when Vice President J.D. Vance came to town to interview him briefly on the tarmac at Dickinson Airport. And then come around next 4th of July, the president's in town. So my 4th of Julys have been different in the last couple years. It was an experience, certainly. Anytime you have an official of that stature coming to town, it throws everything into disarray, right? And it has a pomp and circumstance to it that is incredibly rare.
Especially in North Dakota.
Especially in North Dakota. We're not, we're pretty out of the way. You got to really want to come here to get here. And I think the opening of a presidential library is a perfect example of one of those monumental events that will bring major officials here. My experience with it was chaos in a bottle a little bit. it certainly was interesting. Stuff moves fast when you've got a major official like that. And
there's a lot of pressure,
Yes.
pressure to get the story, to get the shot, to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, it's 90 degrees outside.
We were waiting for a long time, certainly. Yeah, I mean, my experience was getting there at 3 a.m. to preset my equipment, and then having things change between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. when we re-entered, so that it turned out I didn't need to preset my equipment because plenty of journalists were able to walk in with their stuff just fine. So half the time you're doing everything you can to prepare, and then it gets kind of thrown to the wind anyway because something has shifted at the last minute. And you just have to be along for the ride on a day like that, and just hope that you have done enough prep work to be in the right place at the right time, have the right comments to put out a good story. So
I wonder if you liken a covering a big story like that kind of, I wouldn't say it's like the Olympics, but I guess it's the chance for you to show that, I can operate at a level that is of national caliber, regardless of what size of a market I work in every week.
Oh, sure, it's game day, absolutely, and not just for something like a presidential or vice presidential visit. I still feel that when we go into legislative session, we only have one every other year in the state. So for those 4 months, it feels like that's game day. You have to be on. This is rare, and this matters. And I love that. I think a lot of journalists love that. You're going to find a lot of adrenaline junkies in this industry that really thrive on that pressure, and couldn't find it in other fields. For me, it was communications. It doesn't provide that energy and that feeling of gravitas, of import. I am covering something that matters to the people today, to my readers today. And I got to get it right, and I got to be on. That's a good feeling. I really enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. And maybe not to the extent there may have been in years past, but I've noticed in going to the press room at the Capitol that it is really a unique kind of a bullpen situation with multiple outlets. You're friendly. I mean, you're kind of in competition. Sometimes there's a lot of cooperation.
There is.
Which I think is fabulous. Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to have had a lot of collaboration in my experience here. There is certainly a friendly competition to get the story first, and if you can't get it first, to get it better in some way, shape, or form. But it's not at the expense of any other outlet. It is kind of At the end of the day, you'll touch base with a lot of your other reporters. There's not many of us, so we all know each other quite well at the Capitol Bureau. So it's interesting. You'll finish up a story and you'll touch base and say, hey, how did you get this? Or how did you cover this? What did you get to? Oh, I wish I would have gotten that source. Or, oh, I got this. Did you get that too? And so there is a lot of collaboration that I think makes us better. The person that had my job before me a couple iterations ago was a reporter named Jack Dura, who now works for the Associated Press. And it was great because he's still here working at the Capitol for the Associated Press. And I can ask him, hey, how was your experience at the Tribune? How has it changed? What did you look for from a local perspective when you were in my seat? And so I think it makes us all better journalists to be able to collaborate and compare notes.
And I mean, you're not operating in a vacuum, and in a sense, it's almost like an extended classroom experience because you're learning and absorbing knowledge and techniques from the other journalists around you, and that's fairly rare in North Dakota to be able to operate in that kind of an environment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our newsrooms are very small. We've got small towns, which means you've got a small number of people that are able to cover those small towns, and we're a big state, so often I think it can feel very isolating. It's nice to be in an environment like the Capitol where it is a central draw for a number of news agencies, which naturally creates that environment for folks to collaborate.
Mm-hmm. And of course, then, a story you do might end up running in the Fargo Forum.
Sure, yeah.
A story that their correspondent does in Bismarck might end up running in the Bismarck Tribune. I mean, that's kind of leveraging those resources that you were talking about so that everybody benefits from, what either outlet is doing. And that is a new thing.
It is, and I think it comes from what we were talking about earlier, which is the state of modern journalism. It's smaller. It certainly almost requires that kind of collaboration and putting aside of traditional maybe competition that has been the theme for journalism maybe back in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, to pick up more of a collaborative approach because we all at the end of the day have the same goal: inform the residents of the state as best we can. Mm-hmm. And so if that means collaboration, then fantastic, let's do that.
Mm-hmm. So just to wrap it up today, what do you think is the most important thing the public should know about the people who ply the trade of journalism around here?
That's a great question. The most important thing, or the one that jumps out to me about people that ply the trade out here, are how much they care and they enjoy it. A lot of the folks that I engage with, now it is a very specific niche. My experience has been as a politics and capital reporter. So I've dealt with other folks that cover politics and state government mostly. But those that I have engaged with from other media outlets share a care for what they are covering about, a care for their audience and readers.
And really a passion with some of the minutia that the average person might not even realize is important. But I mean, like I've seen arguments about, well, no, it's this way or whatever. But without somebody doing that, how would we find out?
That's a great question, and it's a real drive to explain it to folks in a way that makes sense, because it's very easy, especially with politics or the minutia of state government, to get lost in some legal speak or gobbledygook in the back end. And I think people are really driven, at least that I have met and worked with, to explain that in a way that cuts through a lot of this language that can cloud issues,
right,
and really present it in an easy to read or easy to watch format, where people can come away from it and be like, oh, I got that. That makes total sense. Why has everyone talked about this like it's an issue that's so difficult to comprehend? That was easy.
Right.
And that's like the end goal, right?
Right.
If I've done that,
It's
I can
to
sleep
inform.
well.
Yeah. Speak to me, not at me.
Yeah.
Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. And we want to thank you for listening in on Read Local. We hope it's given you a perspective on some of the challenges and characters that people our journalistic landscape in North Dakota. We'll see you again next time.